Hi everyone, how are you all doing today? It's Blake again with ChessPathways.com, and we're back today for another game analysis video from one of our members. This game was sent to me by Chess user Znosko, who had the black pieces here. I really like their annotations, so I decided to give this game a look. So let's get started. They're facing the e4, the king's pawn opening, and they decide to play d6 with the idea to go for the lion system. So f4. This is already kind of unusual, right? Usually white's going to play d4 here and take the center. And already they made kind of an interesting comment here, and this is why I really like to see these annotations, because I've had this same thought process before myself. They said they spent some time here to think about how to exploit f4, because it exposes the king's diagonal here, and they said they couldn't find anything to exploit, so they just kept going along with their plan. Yeah, so it's good for sure to spend some time thinking about the drawbacks of your opponent's move when you're unfamiliar with it. I feel like a lot of players do this, though, where they see an opening move they've never seen before, and their immediate assumption is that it's bad. It has to be punished, right? There must be something wrong with it if it's not what the theory says. And that's actually not always true. The theory develops based on the most popular moves, the best try to get an advantage for white, the best way to defend for black. So f4 is not popular because it's probably not the best way to get an advantage for white. It's probably just not as popular either, just to commit to, playing this structure, not having as safe of a king already if you castle kingside. Whereas a move like d4 is just very standard, takes the whole middle, really has no drawbacks at all. But that doesn't mean there's anything necessarily wrong with f4, or that it's a bad move, or that there's a refutation, like a lot of players sometimes think there are. So I think the player here with black kind of had the right approach. They saw a move they've never seen before, asked some questions about it, couldn't find a way to refute it, so they kept going along with their plan. That's very good. Knight to f6, knight c3, knight b to d7, and I'm assuming that the player here was not worried about facing d4 because they're probably going to play e5, and they said they're familiar with that lion system, which is a pretty complex line. I've played it myself a few times with the white side. But anyway, white played bishop c4 here, black played e5, and now white played f5. And already this position has almost never been reached. That's one of the amazing and great things about chess. No matter how many, hundreds of thousands of chess games have been played, and no matter how deep opening theory goes, it's still possible to get an original position as early as move 5 sometimes. But it turns out this is not a good plan for white, to close the center here with f5. This just is not supported by white's development, and black has a few good ways to deal with this. In the game, they tried to expand with c6 and kind of play on the queen side. That's fine. They also missed that they just missed a tactic here with knight takes e4. So the point of this tactic is if you take on e4, if white takes back, you have queen h4 check, forking the king and knight, and blocking with the knight is not good enough to save the piece because then the bishop will be loose. So white's going to lose a piece there. Now, I'm not sure if it actually wins a pawn because white has an in-between move here. So if we take on e4, I'm wondering if white can now take on f7. Right, so now we win a piece. But now they win a piece back, and now our tactics don't really work because they're going to be able to block. Either way, though, I think this is favorable for black. We've traded the strong white central pawn for our f7 pawn. Some players would be afraid that we now can't castle, but I mean, we're really just going to be able to develop and tuck our king back pretty fast. So this already here looks favorable for black if we play this line. But okay, even what happened in the game, I think black is a very comfortable position. So after f5, black just said they're going to finish their development. They play bishop e7. White plays d3, c6. Yeah, black says they want to expand and kick the bishop. I would also be wondering if we could get in just d5 instead of expanding with b5. There's all kinds of possibilities here for black. Black doesn't have to commit to any one idea, too soon. Bishop e3. Yeah, and they go ahead and play b5 right away. Yeah, my idea here was going to be something like, can we play knight to b6? Maybe this is one of the ideas. They were going to take our knight if we do this. But then we get the bishop pair, and now we're targeting b2. And if they don't take our knight, looks like we can play d5 here. And this position looks pretty favorable for black. We're threatening d4 winning a piece. If they exchange here, we're going to have this whole center, and now their f5 pawn's weak, and we're still threatening d4, by the way. Yeah, this looks kind of problematic now for white. I guess they can take on b6. And if we take back with the queen, then our pawn's hanging. But even if we just take back with the pawn, although maybe now they can start throwing in this check. Okay, so there are some concerns here that would have to be calculated. This is just one idea. Maybe even to avoid annoying checks, if we go back here after bishop e3, maybe we can even just castle in this position, and then look to implement this idea later. Maybe on the very next turn. Although now white's going to have time to play knight f3, and now if we play d5, this pawn could be under attack if we go with the same knight b6 idea. So there's just a lot of ideas here. I wonder how many of these the player with black considered b5 looks reasonable too, though, just expanding on the queen side, kicking away the white pieces. Probably after we kick this knight away, we can still find a way to get d5 in and really undermine this white pawn chain. I think that's really kind of one of the flaws here, is just white built this pawn chain without any real development to support it, and it's just really easy to undermine this pawn chain by striking at the base of it. That's always one of the typical ways to undermine pawn chains. So bishop to b3, you played b4 to kick that knight and prepare a5, you said. Interesting. So the knight went to e2, you play a5. Yeah, a lot of times I would criticize making too many pawn moves too early before finishing development. Here I think it's fine though, black is just one move away from castling, and it makes sense to grab space on the queen side. A lot of times though, you have to always watch out for white kind of undermining this pawn chain and opening lines, but here I don't think there's really many concerns. White played a4, and you noticed here that they can't actually develop their rook here if you take en passant, because you're going to have d5 with the discovered attack. So you go ahead and take en passant. If they take with the rook, they run into these concerns with d5, like you said. So they have to take with a3, and b takes a3, and now you play a4. Yeah, interesting. So you're kind of fixing this pawn as a weakness, making sure it stays on a3. And you mentioned here, once the bishop moves back to a2, like what happened in the game, you can play d5 with discovered attack on this pawn. Yeah, I think black has a very comfortable position now. I would like to see you get castled, kind of soon, before the center opens up too much. But black seems to have a very easy time finishing his development here, and you have more space in the center. This pawn on a3 could be weak, so we'll see how the game goes. Knight to h3. Interesting. I wonder what white's idea was here. That move doesn't seem very natural to me, putting the knight on h3. Yeah, I can't really see a justification for this. You go ahead and take on a3. Now you're up a pawn. And yeah, white really has no way to exploit this, I don't think. Did you consider what happens if white plays bishop takes d5 with a discovered attack on your bishop? I'm guessing it doesn't work out so great for them, because I wonder if we can even throw in this check. I guess the line that comes to mind is we give this check, they play c3. Now we maybe take here, they take here, and we take here probably. Yeah, this works out good for black. Black stays up material here, I believe. Yeah, okay, so they can't really do that. So this discovery doesn't work. So they go ahead and castle. You played knight g4 with some good tactical ideas here. You're not only threatening this bishop, but you have other threats along this diagonal, which white kind of fell for here. They played queen d2 defending that bishop, and now after takes, and bishop c5, white looks to be in trouble. They're forced to play d4. You take, knight takes d4, and now there's all kinds of pins along this diagonal. So far you've outplayed your opponent. You're up a pawn here, white's kind of tied up in some pins here, but here's where you started to go wrong. This has actually been a theme in a lot of these game analysis videos. A lot of the people sending me these games have gotten great positions out of the opening, and then things have gone wrong after that, which is pretty interesting to me. I think it's because it's pretty easy to play a good opening, at least at some level, by following basic opening principles, which it seems like you did a great job of here. And a lot of players at lower ratings, even, at surprisingly high ratings, up to 1600, 1700, 1800, they just make simple opening mistakes. They violate the opening principles all the time. So if you follow the principles, you can do great out of the opening. But one of the hardest things to do in chess is to kind of, keep that momentum going and turn those good opening positions into good middle game positions and keeping that advantage. So it's just interesting that I've noticed that pattern while doing all these game analysis videos for our Chess Pathways members. So here you said you started to seek exchanges here, which I think is the wrong approach. I think white's under pressure here. You are up a pawn. I can see why you want to kind of simplify being up a pawn, but just exchanging for exchange's sake usually doesn't work out too well. So you played bishop takes d4, kind of giving up all that pressure, letting their queen come here, and your idea was to play queen b6 and just trade stuff off. Okay, so takes, and you saw that these exchanges would bring your knight here, so you're not going to lose a pawn, because your knight's now defending this guy. But now after rook e1, it looks like you have to move your king, and white has a lot of compensation for the pawn now, whereas they didn't before. Again, this seems to be an example of just kind of exchanging for exchange's sake, just because you're up a pawn, and a lot of times this is how your opponent gets back into the game. When I have the positional advantage and the extra pawn, I want to keep him under fire. I want to keep that pressure up. I don't want to cash in and just try to get to this endgame where I can try to convert my extra pawn now that my opponent has a lot of compensation. That kind of comes with experience too. You have to know, when's the right time to cash in on that advantage and go to the endgame, or when do I not really have enough? Because to me, you don't have enough here. This is not just a clean win with the extra pawn here for black. White has plenty of compensation here. The more active pieces, you never did get castled. which is unfortunate. Your pieces are pretty uncoordinated here. You have an isolated pawn White can target. White can quickly double on the file, or White can play rook e5. White has lots of ideas here. So just going back to this position before bishop takes b4, bishop takes d4. I'm just wondering what other moves you considered, because you didn't really mention what candidate moves you came up with here. To me, I think this is a critical position, right? You're up a pawn, the opening's almost over. This is starting to become a tactical position. There's pins, there's a c6 pawn under attack. Your king's still in the center, so you have to worry about discovered check. So this is a critical position. So I'm wondering if you identified this as a critical position and spent the appropriate amount of time here. Some immediate candidate moves that come to mind for me are queen b6, increasing the pressure here, queen f6, attacking that knight, although I think these might fall prey to just e takes d5 with discovered check. I don't know if we have a good enough answer to that. I wonder if we can also just castle here. Like, what if we just castle, get out of all those discovered checks, and just get ready to play something like rook e8 or queen b6 next turn? It looks like White's still under pressure here. You still can't take on c6, because we can take your queen with check. And if you can't do that, then what exactly does White do here? It still feels like White's under pressure here. So I'm just wondering how much time you spent here, and if you spent enough time, coming up with these candidate moves and thinking here, or if you identified this as a critical position. Or did you just think, I'm up a pawn, this is starting to get a little complicated, I want to, seek the comfort of simplifications. I think a lot of players want to simplify, when maybe they shouldn't, because it comforts us kind of to simplify. In simpler positions, you think it's going to be harder to make mistakes, you think it's going to be easier to convert your extra pawn, but it doesn't always work like that. It's usually better just to find the best move in the position and think that way than to, give preference to lines that simplify. Anyway, let's get back to the game. So after king f8, rook e3, you played f6, because you were worried your opponent was going to play pawn to f6. Okay. g4, d4. Huh. Yeah, to me that doesn't look right. You say you play it to attack the rook. You acknowledge it's not a good move. This pawn is kind of keeping this bishop, restricted a little bit. I really think you need to finish your development. That needs to be your #1 priority here. It's just really a question of how. How do you coordinate your pieces here to finish development? It's not as easy as it looks. Like if you play king f7, trying to play rook e8 or something next turn, I'm wondering if this will work. What can White do to kind of stop us from doing this? If we can play rook e8 next turn, I think we're doing all right. What happens if White plays rook to e1? Yeah, and see, now we can't really play a move like this because of the rook e7 check. This is starting to get a little bit annoying. Yeah, see, it's just a little difficult to finish our development here. Anyway, you said d4 is not a good move, but it changes the course of the game. So rook d3, and White just simply missed that you have bishop a6. Yes, you got a little lucky there. What should White do instead? Instead, they probably should just probably play rook e4 and attack your pawn that way. Yeah, so White just blundered here with rook d3, fortunately for you. So bishop a6, and you go ahead and win the exchange. Yeah, so Black's up a clean exchange here. King e7, now your king does look pretty safe there overall. There's still some checks to worry about, but having the exchange here is really, really helpful. Okay, you go ahead and try to trade rooks. White exchanges off the knight, which is helpful for you. Now simplifications really do help you. You're just up too much material now. Rook here, rook c6, king d7. You said king d7 is a bad idea. I'm still not really understanding what's wrong with it. Yeah, what's wrong with this idea? I can't see it. King e7. Yeah, you're also mentioning that time started to become a factor, which is unfortunate in a lot of online games. Looks like you tried to kind of do the right thing and play a longer time control game. I think this was game in 25 or game in 30. Which again, like I've said before, that's long by online standards, but in compared to real life tournament standards, it's not that long, and time does sometimes end up being a factor, which isn't that bad. That means that you took your time and you were thinking. Rook e6, and you played king to f8, and you said your opponent resigned here. And you made an interesting comment here. See, this is, I'm really glad I have these annotations, because usually I would just, end this without comment. It looks obvious to me that Black's winning. You said you weren't sure how you could have, what did you say here? You don't know how you could have turned the next, even if you had the advantage. You don't know what you would have done, is what you're basically saying. So here, with the rook under attack and the bishop under attack, White's going to have to exchange rooks here, I'm pretty sure. There's no real way to avoid exchanging rooks for White. If white moves the rook away, you just take the bishop. So you were saying in a position like this, you take with the king, take with the rook, it doesn't really matter. You were saying you're not really sure how to win this position? So okay, this is worth talking about. So you have a passed pawn here, and you have the rook against the bishop. That's a huge advantage in these positions with wide open files. Especially in the endgame, the rook is just so much better than the minor pieces. Because the minor pieces are restricted, well, the bishop is restricted to one color, and the knights are kind of restricted geographically, if you will. They can't get across the board fast enough. So in this position, I would probably just play, let's see, you do want to watch out for this. You don't want to lose your pawn. Let's just put it on a3 then. You know, this is kind of typical when you're playing against the white bishop. Just put stuff on dark squares. Let's even put our king on a dark square. Just avoid all the tactics. There's really no rush. And we can just come to the b file, swing down to b2, and facilitate our pawn moving forward. That looks to win pretty much immediately, if I'm reading this right. Even if that wasn't possible, though, you just simply, you know, advance your king in. You know, the king can come to e5 and it can never be kicked out. And if the white king tries to stop you, you can, you know, come back and check it away. The rook is just going to do so much more damage than the bishop. And you're just going to stay on dark squares, target all the white pawns. You can, you know, use pawn breaks to your favor to make weaknesses whenever you really need to, advance your own passed pawns. And this is just a really easy win for black. So it makes sense why your opponent resigned here. So okay, thank you for showing us this game. Usually I don't analyze games that the player won because I like seeing the games they lost and struggled with, but I really liked your annotations. I liked it was a longer time control game, and I liked that you really had questions about this game. You said, yeah, I won, my opponent blundered the exchange, but I still feel like something went wrong here when I simplified there in the middle game, and you wanted advice for that. So I appreciate that you were, you know, asking a question, trying to figure out where things got, you know, where things went wrong and how to improve it for the future. So I think the real critical position to learn from in this game was back here in the middle game. Let's go back. Right, takes d4, and yeah, right here, where you seek to simplify instead of adding to your pressure, and it turned out that white got a lot of compensation for that pawn. So I would just be curious if you want to leave in the comments, Znosko, Borovsky, what your thinking process was here. Did you identify this as a critical position? What candidate moves did you come up with here? Or did you just think, you know, I'm up a pawn, I need to simplify, I don't want to blunder, let's get to an endgame. Alright, thanks for watching. I will see you all again soon. If you want your chess game analyzed, make sure you sign up today at chesspathways.com. You'll get access to exclusive content when you join. You'll get a free guide. You can enter our contests. And if you want to get in touch with me to get your game analyzed for free, that's the best way to do it. Thank you all, and I'll see you again soon.